Let's begin with the Trump-Bush feud this evening, certainly showing no sign of cooling down. Joining me now, Kurt Eichenwald, senior writer for Newsweek and the author of 500 Days, Secrets and Lies, and the Terror Wars. Also with us, former New York Police Commissioner Bernard Kerik, who was the city's top cop on that day, 9/11/2001, and CNN presidential historian Douglas Brinkley. So, gentlemen, welcome to all of you.
Thank you.
Let's begin first just with the back and forth on Twitter, shall we? The war of words, the tweets between Trump and Bush. Two examples just today. Trump tweeted, "Jeb is fighting to defend a catastrophic event. I am fighting to make sure it doesn't happen again. Jeb is too soft. We need tougher and sharper." Jeb Bush's response, Donald Trump talks about foreign policy as though he is still on The Apprentice. Commissioner Kerik, you were here in New York on 9/11. You disagree with Donald Trump wholeheartedly on 9/11. Tell me why.
Well, anybody that says that George Bush didn't do everything in his power to keep us safe in the aftermath of the attack, I would have to disagree with. I was there from the point that the second plane hit Tower 2. I was physically standing under the building when it slammed through the building, and I was there for the first 3.5 months afterward, leading the rescue, the recovery, and the NYPD's investigation in conjunction with the FBI. And I know that President Bush, did everything in his power to make sure that we were safe from that point on. Are there things that could have been done differently prior? There probably is, but I would have to say in this 7.5 to 8 months that President Bush was in office, I honestly don't think he could have changed anything in that time.
Okay. Kurt, let me just turn to you, because as part of all these, tweets coming from Donald Trump today, he actually retweeted your New York Times op-ed from 2012. In part, this is what you wrote at the time. The direct warnings to Mr. Bush about the possibility of an al-Qaeda attack began in the spring of 2001. By May 1st, the Central Intelligence Agency told the White House of a report that a group of presently in the United States was planning a terrorist operation. Weeks later, on June 22, the Daily Brief reported that al-Qaeda strikes could be imminent, although intelligence suggested the time frame was flexible. So your opinion piece, this is based upon, myriad briefings I know that you read. Tell me what you learned from those briefings, and is there a seedling of truth to any of what Donald Trump is saying today?
Well, let me say first that, I really respect Commissioner Kerik, and everything he said right now, he accomplished a lot on 9/11. He was there. He was brave.
I feel a butt coming here.
What he's talking about is what happened after 9/11. And the real questions are what happened before. And the reality is that President Bush, based on the presidential daily briefs that I have read, was told more than a dozen times that there was an attack coming, that it was imminent, that there were going to be many casualties, that there were terrorists in the United States, that, it was
the 9/11 Commission report essentially was he shouldn't have been surprised, correct?
No, there was no way he could have been surprised. And I think the look that, in that famous video where Andy Card, the chief of staff, is telling Bush of the attack, I think, I've always thought the look in his eyes was a look of recognition of what he'd been told. But, but there is an element here. I am not saying Bush could have stopped 9/11. We don't know. If things were different, would they be the same?
Right.
The problem Jeb Bush is making, and the problem that is made across the board, is we are talking about history. And the argument that Jeb Bush is making is he knew nothing and nothing could have been done.
Well,
that fundamentally isn't true.
Let me jump in, because we have a historian, Douglas Brinkley, here.
I don't know if anything could be done.
Right, I understand. And Doug, when you hear people talking about this today, they're jumping in using the example of FDR and warnings about an attack on Pearl Harbor. Tell me about that argument. Do you buy that?
Well, look, it's easy to blame presidents for what happens on their watch. And yes, there was a whole bunch of backdoor to war theories that FDR was asleep at the wheel. Most of it's nonsense, or almost all of it's nonsense. FDR didn't want to see our fleet bombed, and he rallied the country together and won World War II. I think the argument here is that once 9/11 happened, President Bush behaved heroically. The famous bullhorn moment, the throwing the ball at Yankee Stadium in pull the country together. What's being debated by Jeb Bush and Donald Trump are those months leading up to 9/11. And there are memos that say, my gosh, why didn't President Bush notice Osama bin Laden, big threat, on documents? But presidents are very busy, and hindsight's very difficult. So I find it gauche that Donald Trump has pushed this into the election cycle right now. I'm not sure what it's accomplishing.
You know, part of Trump's argument, and Commissioner Carrick, I want to come back to you. Part of his argument is, and listen, he's talked very tough on immigration, right? And he says, had there been stiffer immigration policies at the time, he's actually gone as far as saying 9/11 could have been prevented. But when you actually do the digging, you read that all of those 9/11 hijackers, they were in the U.S. legally. Only 2 overstayed their visas. Yeah,
that's right. And you know what? In many ways, both Kurt and Doug are right. The reality is, if we looked at memos today in the White House and the chatter today, it's far, far worse than anything President Bush had back then. You also have to realize, Brooke, that this has been going on since '96. Right around the same time, the attacks on this country, President Clinton had the Al-Qabar Towers, had the Kenya and Tanzania bombings of the embassies, had the USS Cole. There were plenty of warning signs going into 2000 when President Bush was elected. So, it's nice to look and say, who would have, could have, should have. The reality is, I personally don't think anybody could have done anything different or would have been able to stop what happened on September 11th.
Go ahead, Kurt.
But Brooke, one of the things that people are portraying it as if this was part of, a huge slosh of information that was crossing Bush's desk. It wasn't. This was the focus of these multiple briefings. In fact, everyone knows of the August 6th briefing because it's the only one the White House released, the Bush White House, where it is a historical assessment of Al-Qaeda, and it does have the bin Laden determined to strike U.S., but it is historical. Well, the reason that document exists is because Bush was getting so many briefings that said an attack is coming, an attack is coming, an attack is coming, that he said, I want a historical analysis. So and that's what came.
And it's important to look back, but hang on, gentlemen. I want to look forward. And Doug, I want to go to you on this, because obviously some of these Trump attacks are forcing Jeb Bush to sort of, defend his brother. But when you look at some of these polls, let me leave people with this. The opinion of President George W. Bush, this was taken in May. Among Republicans, 88% favorable. Not to mention, and listen, I was there at the Reagan Library during the Republican debate where, the line Jeb Bush was saying, my brother kept us safe, was a huge, huge applause line. Now, granted, you look at the audience, but still, Doug, how does this affect Jeb Bush moving forward?
I think Jeb has to square off on Donald Trump and defend his brother like he's doing. I mean, this is the heart and soul of any George W. Bush legacy, is he kept the country safe after 9/11, created Homeland Security, and we didn't have another attack on his watch. Trump is muddying the waters here, and I think if Jeb is very passive towards Donald Trump, it's going to look terrible. So he has to, I think, ratchet it up even more and have the argument that he's starting to have, that Donald Trump knows nothing about foreign policy. We could go back into history and blame every president for anything that happened on their watch. It's not very helpful for how we go forward right now. And Trump, I think, is going to alienate some Republicans on taking this stance on 9/11, where he doesn't alienate them when he criticizes George W. Bush for the Iraq War.
All right. Doug Brinkley, Bernie Carrick, and Kurt Eichenwald, thank you all so much.
Thank you.
A reminder to all of you watching, thank you. Donald Trump will be on CNN's New Day tomorrow morning, which starts at 6 a.m. Eastern. Tune in.